Well, as you know, the state monitor for East Ramapo is a very divisive issue, and I want to bring in our panel right now to weigh in. Phil Reisman, Journal News columnist; Dominic Carter, political journalist and author; Shelley Mayer, Democratic Assemblywoman representing Yonkers; Jessica Proud, Republican strategist, PR expert with the November team. She also spokesperson for Dan Donovan's successful recent congressional campaign; and Andrew Whitman, our senior political correspondent. Guys, thank you very much. And Assemblywoman, you voted along with the sponsor, you voted for the bill.
I was a co-sponsor of the bill.
Was it a tough choice or no? I was surprised that the vote, while like I said, it wasn't a nail-biter, 50-some-odd number of your colleagues voted no, and about another more than a dozen abstained, right?
No, I don't think abstained. They were not present. Whether that was intentional or not, I can't say. They didn't technically abstain. It was a very contentious debate, and I actually thought the tone of it was very unfortunate. It's fair to have a disagreement over the policy of having a monitor in a district that really had severe problems. I happen to think it's the right approach. I don't think that when you have children, the idea that simply because a board is elected, that means it trumps the real responsibility we have to educate children appropriately. And I read Hank Greenberg's report, who was appointed by the State Education Department. I spoke to him on the phone. This was a very measured response. I was very pleased to stand strong and to really support what I think were the children and the families that are predominantly in the public schools. And I think it was very unfortunate the debate became so tinged with personal hostility. And I think the sponsors, Ken Zabrowski, who you had on, and Ellen Jaffe, deserve a great deal of credit for, you know, doing the politically courageous thing, but the thing they thought was right for their constituent children.
Some of the most contentious language, is it around, frankly, some of the politics and some of the consequences, or when it got into accusations of anti-Semitism and the stuff, did it get to the cheap shot level?
There was, I think all members made an effort not to go into the accusations of anti-Semitism, but they were out there in the world around us as we've been fighting about this bill, and certainly I've heard them, and
I've heard them, even talking about this issue.
Yeah.
And you've covered, your paper has done a good job covering this, Phil. It's interesting, some of the language. Sure, there's the slippery slope argument, but it's a lot more than that, isn't it?
Well, I think it boils down to what is going on in that school district, and the report stated figures that are pretty stark about the performance of K through 8, the kids that are failing, they're not anywhere near performance standards on things like math and things like that. So at some point, it's not you know, I don't think there's an attack on the school board about its intent, which is, I think, some of the discussion. It's the results that matter.
yes, totally.
And I think, you know, I mean, I don't know if you've caught this, Shelley, but I do sense that there is some effort to compromise here on the part of at least the school board president. Said some things that I thought were fairly positive on that end today. So
I didn't hear him today. I did meet with him earlier prior to the vote, and you know, explained my position and how passionately I feel that when children are the subject of our debate, that really does trump everything else. This is way too important for the small politics of any community to trump the interests of the children.
The board was beginning to talk about controller oversight. You turn into the state controller's office and having them get involved as opposed to a monitor who actually has veto power with the board. I've asked this before, but I don't understand if there's a claim that the civil rights of the students are being violated to a certain degree, why a judge hasn't been able to step in and get involved, which I think might sit better with some of the Hasidic members of the community and of the board. But no judge has ruled on this, and so you do have that question of the state legislature, in this case, basically overriding the voters in that school district.
Well, just to say that I think there have been some cases brought and maybe no decision yet, but that doesn't mean that legislators don't have a responsibility to ensure that education is provided to those children. And this wasn't so much a civil rights claim as the fact, as Phil said, the board simply was not delivering the services children need. This was not taking away the power of the board. This is a modest step forward towards trying to address those needs, in my opinion.
There's precedent for this. I mean, you've seen it with municipalities, with New York City. They had a financial control board, Erie County, Long Island, Nassau County. So it's not like this is some, you know, wildly new proposal that they're stepping in with.
Explain a little of the politics to me for a sec, Jessica, in that I got a note earlier in the week from the Rockland GOP that they were in lockstep, that the current county executive, his predecessor's dad, and then that they thought that what was going on in East Ramapo was wrong, and they supported the bill. Without doing the math beforehand, I figured a lot more in the GOP would come down. Why was there a schism here? Was it the argument of, you know, the concern of the slippery slope, or was it something else?
I think it's really a response that they've been getting in their office from people that have been so concerned about this issue. They've also been concerned about the overdevelopment issue in Rockland County. So they're hearing such a strong outcry from their constituents, which is, I think, precipitating their involvement in it. But one of the things, just to go back to the vote, that I thought was really interesting was that I heard that former Speaker Shelley Silver was on the floor, but on the floor actually whipping votes against it, which I thought was kind of interesting. A, to just see him do that, and imagine the punishment if he had been Speaker of others that, you know, would have attempted the same thing. So
I didn't turn back the clock. That would have been a good one.
There were some Republicans who crossed over and voted in favor of it. I think about 8 of the Republicans in the Assembly voted yes. Republicans in the Senate are the ones who seem to be holding the biggest objection to it right now. As for the Republican Party in Rockland County, I think a lot of them have made a calculation that this is a voting block that we can win without. And Ed Day won county executive without the Hasidic voting block in Rockland County. 3 of the 4 countywide offices are held by Republicans, and they've won without this block. I think they're taking a stand against the block voting, and that's why you've seen some crossover between this block the block movement in Rockland County and the county party.
And before we get to what you think happens next, Dominic, as we've talked about in this program, you've been an eyewitness to this. Your school district, you dealt with issues with your son. I know sometimes issues aren't just, you know, cut and dry, and there's shades of gray. In this one, not so much, in that as a parent, we can choose where we want to send our kids to school. You want to send your kids to the public school, your tax dollars go there. If you want to go in the private school route, that's your choice. But it seemed that the debate became whoever on the school board, and they didn't have their kids in a public school system, they used what was in that pot of money to benefit one population over another. And to Andrew's point, that is dragged on to this, that the courts, in effect, have punted this back to the legislature to decide. This has been long simmering. And I was talking to the legislator that we heard earlier after the interview, and he said, tensions are really high right now. You've seen this firsthand. It's gotten progressively worse. Somebody's got to do something. This will not take care of itself.
This definitely, full disclosure, this is the school district that I belong to, and I've had experience battling the board. I had to, because my son's a special needs child, epilepsy, we felt that he needed special services, so you go to the board, and it's almost an automatic reject what's happening to the kids of color. But yet, what historically is shown is that the children, and all the kids are entitled to a good education. The Hasidic children, their educations with the same pot of money that you just referred to, that same pot of public money is being used for them to go to yeshiva schools and so on. And so if you just look at the numbers, I understand each side of this argument. You have an independently elected board. You have, on the other side, Black and Latino kids, where it's just not right what's going on, Richard. This is not the American way. This is not Alabama in 1964. I mean, it's just not right. And so, back to your point, if you think this is going to resolve itself, it's not going to happen, because you have these board members that will continue to do whatever they feel they should do, and that's the end of the story.
And Phil, my only thing is, this is 30 miles from New York City, right? And we're having these conversations. It's just the geography of this is stunning sometimes. As people say, oh, this couldn't happen. Well, it is happening right around here, and it hasn't changed, this conversation. There's more media attention maybe to it now, but this has been going on for a while.
Yeah, and and I think it will go on for a lot longer. So, but You know, the thing about this that's interesting to me is that, you know, there have been, as Jessica pointed out, other takeovers, and you know, and there have been intervention in Yonkers and DSEG and things like that, and the composition of the school board has been an issue in Yonkers, where many of the members traditionally never had kids in that public school system. But these things, and that was how they were elected and everything else, but when it becomes something as I said before, as stark as this,
Yep.
you know,
Well,
it just...
What's your feeling? What happens next when it gets to the Senate? It seems, depending on the day, you get a different answer. Are they going to work on the bill? Are they going to amend certain parts of it, you think?
Well, I don't know. One, Senator Carlucci sat through the entire debate, which was several hours on Friday, which never happens, as a co-sponsor of the bill in the Senate. I think Senator Flanagan, as a leader, has now expressed reservations. You know, the parents are remarkably organized, the parents, the public school parents. And they have, as I said, they came up to thank all of us who signed on. They're going to put pressure on the Senate, Republicans and Democrats, that this is the right thing to do. The governor's indicated his support. And I don't think it's over. If it doesn't pass right now in the Senate, this bill will be back next year in the Assembly with additional force, because to Dominic's point, what's going to happen in the next 6 months when you don't have an independent monitor sort of helping to tamp down the conversation and try to work things out at a more reasonable tone? I think it's going to escalate, and if it doesn't pass now, it'll be back next year, and next year's an election year.
Assemblywoman, have you gotten a sense from anybody in the Senate that this is a priority for members of the Senate? I mean, other than the Rockland contingent in the state Senate, because somebody's going to have to put some force and some emphasis behind this to make it one of the things that gets done by the deadline on Wednesday.
Well, honestly, I wish I could be so innocent thinking as that. It's not force, it's what are they going to trade for it? I mean, they have to want it enough to give up something else they want.
Right.
And I don't know that that's the case. I don't know that there's a consensus. Senator Carlucci is important to the IDC and therefore important to the Senate Republicans. Maybe there's a political deal to be struck. But I don't know what's going to happen. I just think the parents are not going to go away, and they and parts of the Reformed Jewish community and communities of clergy in Rockland are going to continue to be heard loud and clear for the next 6 months.
When we come back from break, we will stay in Albany, if you will, as the legislative session is different than some others. The fallout from all the corruption indictments is making things even more chaotic than usual. We'll explain after this.